All right, Chad. We talked a little bit about British politics in the Tabernacle interview I wanted to show it to you. It's pretty great.
Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has appeared on Sky News. He was asked about his failure to reach a negotiated settlement with Britain's rail workers.
Why have these negotiations failed?
Essentially, the unions do not want to modernise the work practices so we can run a modern railway for passengers. Essentially, they've been taking the passengers for a ride with some of these antiquated methods that are in place, for example, not being able to send out a single van, having to send 2 vans to maintenance, and not running a 7-day service, for example. We have to literally, on some railway lines, appeal to the better nature of staff to even run a railway service on a Sunday. And that can't be right in the 21st century when leisure travel actually is the bigger part, or becoming the bigger part of the transport network. So we have to have this modernisation. It's there to be sorted out, and therefore a pay rise can be had as well. But I'm afraid the unions have been incredibly militant about this, and that's where we are today.
And the unions are saying that they haven't spoken to a minister for months. When was the last time you spoke to them?
They don't need to speak to ministers to resolve this because their employers are the people who have the mandate to negotiate this. They're the people who they can resolve this with. So this is just, I'm afraid, them trying to distract attention. And if I put this into perspective, since I've been Transport Secretary, they've issued about 160 different disputes. There hasn't been a single day where there hasn't been either strike action or a mandate for strike action ongoing. That's just not normal in any industry. And that's why we need to, I'm afraid, do more to remove the power of these very militant extreme left unions from disrupting everyday lives to ordinary people.
That was Grant Shapps blaming the strikes on the unions, who he thinks are overly militant and opposed to any modernisation. The RMT's Mick Lynch was up next on Sky. Let's see his response.
He's responsible for this dispute in the sense that he has a veto on what the train operating companies can offer us. It's written into their contracts that he's directly responsible for industrial relations, and he can dictate what the terms are. And the fact is they've made no offer on pay towards our members. What they've offered us is mass redundancies, recontracting our members on inferior terms and conditions, massive changes to their work-life balance, and cuts in Network Rail to the safety regime of up to 50% of the inspection. So he's caused this problem, and he's got to facilitate a way out of it, and he could do that today. And if he wants to facilitate a negotiated settlement, I'm very happy to deal with him. But what he won't do is contact me or any of my officers or any of the people responsible for this negotiation and create a way forward.
And the reason he won't is because he says that you're militant, that you're extreme left. And he went on to say that you're not normal because there have been 160 different disputes, and there is some sort of dispute or balloting for a dispute every single day.
Well, it's ironic to be called not normal by the Conservative Party, who are taking themselves into the realms of the extreme right at the moment, as we've seen in this contest. They're saying that paying tax isn't normal, and having free trade unions with the ability to take industrial action isn't normal. The people behind me are ordinary men and women in this country. They work hard to deliver the railway service, and what they don't want to do is see their wages diluted, their terms and conditions diluted, and their contracts of employment ripped up. So I'm not a militant. I'm not even a member of a political party, and I haven't been for 30 years. So the idea that we're running some ideological campaign is nonsense, frankly. What we want to do is get a settlement, so a straightforward industrial dispute on jobs, pay and conditions.
Is it right that he says that 2 vans have to go to every job as opposed to even 1 van being needed, but you double up on everything?
No, that's a load of nonsense. He doesn't know what he's talking about. We are talking to Network Rail about the deployment of staff every day of the week. There's never been an occasion where our members refuse to get in a van with other people. It's rubbish.
Mick Lynch also contextualised Shapps' claims about the frequency of disputes by saying the RMT deal with over 500 employers, and that disputes moving to strike action is actually incredibly rare, obviously incredibly disingenuous from Grant Shapps. In a separate and later interview, Lynch was asked about the disruption that strikes inevitably cause. And this time he was even more robust.
We don't want to disrupt people, but they have an effect on the companies. They're not getting their income, and they're being indemnified by the government to conduct this dispute. The government is giving these companies £20 million a day to run this dispute on their behalf. So it has an effect. We don't want to have the effect and the disruption on the public. We want a settlement and an agreement that our members can support.
And is going on strike the only way to achieve this, or is there another form of action that we could take?
I could do trial by combat or something if you like, but I can't think of a way at the moment because we've been negotiating for 2 years. But it would be interesting if me and Grant Shapps went head to head. We could see how we got on with that, if that's not too flippant. If you've got any other ideas about how I can pursue it, I'll happily take them up.
Oh, fuck yes! He's an actual gauntlet man! He wants the gauntlet! Yeah! Oh my god. I want to see a railway worker with calluses the size of a quarter or a $50 wrap his fingers around that Tory fuck's throat. Yes! Oh my god. Absolute Chad. Complete Chad. Or else ellipsis. Thanks for the 12 months. Thanks, bud.
About how I can pursue it, I'll happily take them up.
Dahlia, would you like to see Mick Lynch in a trial by combat head-to-head with Grant Shapps, and who would win?
I mean, if they're going to ban the right to strike, then I don't know what. Anyway, let me not speak too much. But you know, this is just like the most classic, old-fashioned, boring form of union bashing, basically. It's, you know, you blame workers, you push society to its limits. You create a completely unsustainable system. And then when society reaches that breaking point, which often manifests in the form of mass strikes, you then turn around and blame the workers for the disruption that everyone is feeling, which is not a consequence. It's not like workers going on strike is a symptom, not a cause of that crisis. It's essentially like pushing someone off a cliff and then getting mad at them for wasting ambulance resources when they actually try to resolve the situation. And again, this is the classic Thatcherite model. I thought, you know, when Grant Shapps was saying, oh, the unions just don't want to modernize, this was exactly what we heard from Thatcher. And for her, modernization was a way of making the financialization of the economy seem like an inevitability. What she was basically saying was that this transition from one stage of capitalism to financial capitalism was inevitable, and the unions were just refusing to modernize. And what I think Grant Shapps is gesturing towards there when he says, you know, the unions are refusing to modernize, is to essentially move to this kind of Uberization of the economy, which, as we know from the Uber files, Grant Shapps was very happy to be actively lobbied and to actively lobby on behalf of Uber, despite the fact that we knew that they were breaking the law on employment classification, on worker classification, and the fact that we knew that they were flouting local regulations. And what I mean by that Uberization of the economy is trying to create a kind of employment model where companies and employers essentially take no responsibility for health and safety, take no responsibility for the standard post-war social contract employment norms like pensions, like sick pay, like, you know, paid holiday leave, treating the workers like they are disposable, like they're on demand, like it doesn't matter how you treat this worker. When they burn out, we're just going to move on to the next one. We're just going to hire and rehire. And essentially making the workforce incredibly insecure and incredibly precarious. And that is the model that someone like Grant Shapps means when he talks about modernizing the economy. And that is precisely the thing that the RMT is trying to resist. And so that exact playing out of, you know, trying to transition to an even more exploitative and unstable form of capitalism under the guise of modernization, and blaming workers who are rightfully resisting the degradation of their rights. It's the same Thatcherite model just being rolled out in the 21st century. And of course, as was true during Thatcher's time, none of this is inevitable. There is no inevitable stage of development that we all have to move towards. The way that we go over the next 5, 10, 15 years is a political choice. And the choice that the Tories are trying to force us to make is an unsustainable and catastrophic one. And the choice that Mick Lynch and the rest of the true Labour movement are trying to push us to make is one that is environmentally sustainable and that actually enables workers to be paid adequately for their time and to also have other forms of social welfare to catch them when they get old, when they get sick, if they have dependents, etc. And so really the question is between those two different kinds of working model. I know which one I'm on the side of, but I think that we should really see this as Grant Shapps deploying the exact same tactics that Thatcher deployed. And we should learn from those struggles to figure out how we are going to ensure that, unlike in the 1970s, Shapps and his like don't win this time round.
And Melanie, the thing about Uber spending $200 million on Prop 22 is Uber doesn't make any fucking money. That's all from banks. They spent $200 million of money they didn't even earn. That's the financialization of our economy right now. All right, Chad, I wanted to show you this because it's absolutely making me mauled. Should wages be increased to match inflation? We ask an expert. All right, Chad, here we go. What do you think they're going to say? Any predictions?
Well, yes, we've heard that it's something that's happening all around the world, workers calling for wage increases amid the price rises. So let's talk to an expert, Rosalia Vasquez Alvarez from the International Labour Organization. Thank you very much for joining us. We've seen the strikes today by Lufthansa workers, as we heard Christy talking about just there. It's an example of many pay strikes recently. Just how hard is the rising cost of living hitting the average worker?
Okay, so for what we observe in our data sets, we see that erosion of wages, real wages, is actually happening everywhere in just about all the different countries around the world. Just to give you some examples, in the US, Japan, and Mexico, wages have declined by 2% in real terms since the beginning of the year. But in countries like Sweden and of the Netherlands, for example, if we compare wages, real wages, from 2020, January 2020 to today, we observe a 5% decline. So clearly what we observe is that wages are not keeping up with inflation, and this is actually eroding the purchasing power of families around the world.
Okay, so there is a genuine concern, but I guess it depends on the region as to how hard it's hitting. But there is the concern, a lot of discussion among economists about the possibility of a wage price spiral. So when wages go up, workers demand more goods, driving up the cost of those goods. Is the fear of rising wages driving inflation, is that justified? What would you say?
We wouldn't say that that's justified, not according to the data that we see. For example, if you look at wage growth across the world in the past 10 years, what we observed is wages have actually increased by only 1%. If you look at high-income countries, that's even less than 1%. But even more than that, what's the telling figure is that if you look at productivity growth and you look at wage growth, there is a growing gap between the two, and productivity growth is what actually should drive wage growth. And there is actually a growing gap that it's about 10% approximately.
So what she's saying is, as workers produce more, they're not getting higher wages. And wages are not going up. They have no bearing. The inflation we're suffering now has nothing to do with wages. Nothing whatsoever to do with wages. In fact, wages are falling back even further. You got tricked, motherfuckers. You got tricked, motherfuckers. I tricked you. I tricked your asses.
In terms of percentage points. So clearly there is no such thing as a wage price spiral. A wage price spiral is usually associated with the situation where you have low unemployment, followed by high aggregate demand, followed by high wage demands. But
you got
the
debated.
wage bargaining process, it's actually been relatively weak in the past decades. So clearly there is no such thing as a situation where wage price spiral may actually drive higher wage growth and higher inflation rates. In fact, inflation is actually driven by the fact that you have the supply chain, a supply chain problem in the process, and that actually is what drives high inflation. But it's not necessarily true that the data is telling us today that there is going to be an actual wage price spiral going on in the near future. Nowhere, anywhere in the world.
Okay, so can you give us some good news here, just briefly? Are things going to get better anytime soon?
Well, it depends very much on the kind of combination of policies that you put in place. If you have,
what do you say that people that say inflation is due to those tiny stimmies we got during the pandemic? Absolutely batshit crazy. People no longer have money. Consumption is actually not increasing. And and we saw massive supply chain crises. We're not building. Our house. I'll give you an example of like concrete things you can talk about. Home building lower than it was. Our rate. So we're not. It's not that we're building more homes than we ever were before. Like it's not that we use up all the lumber and that's why lumber went up. That's not what happened. So home building's down. Consumption is flat. Savings is down. That spasm that people didn't have a bunch of extra money. That stimulus money was a replacement of money they didn't have because they couldn't go out and work. Inflation is very straightforward. Supply chain crisis plus energy crisis. We have a supply shortage. It has nothing to do with demand. Demand is flat. We are not building enough homes. We're not importing the goods because of COVID shutdowns. And then there was a war in Russia that caused a cutoff of energy that caused energy prices to spike worldwide. Meanwhile, we're sanctioning Venezuela. We're sanctioning Iran. So we're cutting ourselves up from two of the top sources of oil in the world. Our intervention in Libya massively knocked down their production as well. Our disgusting NATO intervention in Libya that destabilized that country has destroyed their energy industry as well. They're also a top oil exporter. So our interventions in Libya, our interventions in Venezuela, our interventions in Iran, our support of the an escalation of the war in Ukraine. You want to know why we have a crisis? Our foreign policy sucks. My boss said he is not in a recession, so I'm not in a recession. So should I leave my job before he fires me? I don't know what that means. You know, any good econ books or anything that could teach a less capitalist perspective of economics? I mean, that's such a broad question. I don't know what you mean by less capitalist perspective. If you want to cut wages and increase taxes, workers will lower demand, so prices will decrease to meet lower supply. In Econ 101 theory, you can't cut wages. Wages are sticky. You can't just cut wages. Can't do that. Giving someone that lost their job because of COVID $500 that went right into rent caused inflation. Not giving trillions of dollars to the ultra rich who want infinite goodies. If you want to know where we actually overstimulated, it was Wall Street. We gave infinite money to Wall Street with quantitative easing, low interest rates, and PPP. That's where the fucking money went. PPP.
Have only tight interest rates, tight monetary policy, without any other type of policy going on, such as reassuring that wages are actually keeping up with inflation, then clearly you may actually erode wages even further. That will actually decrease aggregate demand, that will have a significant impact at reducing employment levels. And so there's not necessarily the case that only tight monetary policy should be put in place. Government has to look into the whole process and put together policies that help also particularly low-income families who are more hit by inflation than the average family in the population.
All right, chat. It's time for us some Hogwatch. Full-blown Hogwatch. Watch mega chuds all over 2020. This shit is always... This is always a good community energy lift. Okay.
Barr not find any evidence of... so why did Bill Barr not find any evidence of voter fraud?
Because Bill Barr is a never-Trumper.
Bill Barr? His Attorney General?
Bill Barr was a never-Trumper and is.
So Bill Barr, who Trump appointed, and has said that he would vote for Trump again. You think he is a never-Trumper?
Let's do Ruben. Since we're on a kick. Why not?
So why did Bill Barr not find any evidence of voter fraud?
Because Bill Barr is a never-Trumper.
Bill Barr? His Attorney General?
Bill Barr was a never-Trumper and is.
So Bill Barr, who Trump appointed, and has said that he would vote for Trump again. You think he is a never-Trumper?
I absolutely do.
So why did Bill Barr not find any evidence of
And like that's really all it is, chat. That's really all it is. Non-stop, crazy. Like look at this fucking freak.
To San Diego, and guess what I came home to be greeted with? This fucking bullshit. What the hell is that? Huntington Beach is the town of good old-fashioned, hardworking American people. The people that worked all through the COVID lockdowns. Yes, that's right. Huntington Beach never shut down through any of the COVID nonsense fuckery. And now we're peddling this garbage? What the hell is this? The only flag that should be up there is that American flag. It's a disgrace to our city, and it should be taken down immediately. running this town needs to be fired. Make America great again. Make Huntington Beach to San Diego.
Boring. Boring. Can't even trigger me. Imagine not even being able to trigger me. Boring. Boring. Are you watching the stream unsubbed? You're making income inequality worse. You are doing anti-praxis. We are the only Twitch stream that will not accept scam advertisers, and I will never fuck you over by selling you crap.